it is life changing, and it's very practical, because sometimes they say about the church is that we're so heavenly minded that we know earthly good, and that shouldn't be. We should be really practical. We should have a full understanding of the full panorama of God's word when it comes to money. So, Des, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, for those who weren't here last week, I do apologise that the sound on the recording was a bit low. Donovan and I had some confusion when Donovan offered me the microphone, because I thought, well, if it doesn't amplify, what good could it be? But actually, it's actually for the recording so much. And so some of them, my wife Remini listened to the recording and said it was actually quite quiet. So if you can't hear me at the back, please put a hand up or something so that. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Great. Okay, so last week we talked about biblical finances, and I just want to review that for those who weren't here and who haven't listened to the very low volume tape. So we talked about that the love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. That actually we need to recognize that in this fallen world that we live in, money itself is not evil, but the love of money can actually lead us into problems. So that's what we talked about, and we actually used some Old Testament scriptures to actually highlight God's plan for Christian lives, basically. Um, we talked about the deceitfulness of wealth and how it can lead us astray. And as Greg's just mentioned, we're daily in a battle. We need to recognize in everything we do that we are living in a battle. There is a devil out there who seeks to rob, kill, and destroy. And when it comes to finances, he's very, very good at it. He's had a lot more experience than we have at disrupting. And so we need to recognize that we are in that battle, and he uses some pretty nasty tactics. And next week, we're going to talk about debt. This week, we're talking about budgeting and controlling your budget. But I say overall, we need to recognize that he wants to, first of all, steal and take away, but he also wants to get us into debt and keep us under his control. So we'll deal with that a bit next week. But as well as wanting to kill, God wants to bless and prosper us, and that was the message that came out. And I wanted to sort of stress that it's not a prosperity message as many of us have heard in recent days. It's actually a message based on biblical values. If you look at what God did throughout the Old Testament, he talks about a people of his own, and we are that people. And he wants us to bless those people so that they could be a blessing. And because we are grafted into that, we're grafted into Israel, that root is still true for us today. Our whole purpose in life is to be blessed by God and be a blessing to others. He wants to bless us. He can't stop himself from blessing us. We have a God who wants to bless us in every way. And we can see that all around us. If you look at nature as a whole, we're amazed at how abundant he is in the things he does. And so he does want to bless us, but he wants to bless us in order that we can be a blessing. So it's not a give to get message, it's a give to give message. He wants to bless us so that we can be a blessing to others. And that's certainly necessary in our day. The other factor I wanted to sort of stress is that um, he wants us to be generous and to have a generous heart. And it was mentioned this morning that he gave so much, he was willing to give even his son for us so that we might have life eternal. And so we need to recognize that should be our heart too, to be generous. But in order to be generous, you have to have money to give. I mean, I know we can give in other ways. There are many ways that God blesses us. And we can get good knowledge, we can be a blessing to others through the things we do. But there is also something about the need to bless people financially and prosper people and help people who are struggling. So we looked at the story of the talents and how God dealt with the one who didn't use his talents. And throughout the Old Testament scriptures in Deuteronomy, there was, yes, God wants to bless us, but he also has an expectation on us. If we prosper, he expects us to be a blessing to others. He doesn't expect us just to keep it for ourselves. or to just bury it and not use the talents that he's given us. So there was quite a condemnation on the one who buried his talent and did nothing with it. But the ones who took their talents and used them to prosper, they were the ones who were, well done, good and faithful servant. And that's what we all want. We want to be, when we get to those pearly gates, we want to hear that message, well done, good and faithful servant. And finances is one of those areas where we're trained and learn how to do those things. So there's some practical reasons. But I also want to just point out that there is concern about prosperity. There's been a modern day prosperity message which has gone out, which is this based on New Age principles. They've used Bible scriptures to get people to give, with the idea that the more you give, the more you will get. So God becomes this one-armed bandit. You put the money in, pull the handle, and out it springs. Well, it's not like that. Actually, if you look at our Judeo-Christian roots and get back to those, then we're safe and secure. Because the church today has often they believe that they've replaced Israel in the economy of God. And that therefore the Old Testament that's the Old Testament, that's the Old Covenant. We've got the New Covenant, we live under grace. But actually the Old Testament gives us the foundations that we need to build something solid. And sadly, much of the church has replaced, they've moved into replacement theology. They've ignored the Old Testament teachings. They've ignored the principle that God laid down to the Jewish people. And as a result, they've gone astray. And there's so many teachings out there we need to be wary of. So always go back to our Judeo-Christian roots. If we avoid those sort of messages that come out that simply say, just do this for yourself, then you will be safe. If it says, do this, possibly even suffer in doing it, but be a blessing to others, then you can almost certainly guarantee that's God. He wants to prosper us, but sometimes we have to stand up and realize that actually that takes a bit of pressure on our part to do it. And so today we're looking at a more practical side. We're going to have a look at sort of budgeting and so on, and see how we can maybe improve our budget. So for those who were here last week, we all had homework. You took away your worksheets, but you also took away your spending versus saving. Now, I don't know whether you've got your score sheets with you, but I wanted to sort of give you, for those that have, I wanted to sort of explain what those scores mean. So if you have your results, you don't necessarily need to share them with people, but I'll give you some idea of what it means. This is based on the CAP money, Christians Against Poverty. If your score is 1 to 30, then you spend a lot. Okay, you love spending your money and on things quickly and often spontaneously. Be careful to spend within your means, is what the advice is here. Spontaneity isn't a bad thing as long as you have a fund set aside for spontaneous spending. In other words, don't be tempted to spend beyond your means. If your score is 31 to 50, then you're veering on the spending side. You usually succumb to impulse buys, but there's a part of you that sometimes stops you before you hand the money over. Just, if you're 51 to 70, this is a good balance. Okay, you are a planner, but your planning may restrict you from making quick financial decisions. Just make sure you stick to your budget and you'll be fine. Now, if you're on the 71 to 90, you're on the saving side. You're someone who you enjoy seeing those savings build and would rather sacrifice a short-term gain for your long-term plan. You sometimes act spontaneously, only sometimes, but so factor this in when you build a budget. Okay? Now, I mean, the other score is 91 to 100. Isabel, you're probably in this category. super saver. You, you love to save every penny, and it's great to be wise with your money, but don't limit your generosity or stop yourself enjoying your life while you save. And the reason I got you to do them individually is because often you will find in a marriage you have two opposites. And that's certainly the case in ours. I mean, Remini would probably be super saver category. I would probably be super spontaneous spender type. In her view, I don't believe I am because, but often opposites attract. And in a marriage, it's important when you're dealing with your finances that you talk about it. You really do need to be honest with each other and find some balance in your relationship. Greg mentioned last week, I think, that so many relationship problems come down to money. Lots of marriage breakups are because of finances. And it's often because you don't understand the different characters involved in the different ways you deal with money. But actually, it's often because you don't communicate it, you don't talk about it. It's so important to have honest discussions about money because it's one of the things that actually can really affect your life. I mean, Remedy and I can look back over what 40 plus, well, what all of you, more than coming up to 50. Uh, it's couple of years away. But we can look back over that time and we can see that there have been times when we've probably I have made the wrong decision when it comes to finances. And you know, it would have been great if we'd have actually maybe communicated a bit better at that point and would have saved ourselves quite a lot of grief. But actually, when you're in marriage together, it's something you work out over time. I say so. Communication is really important. So that little test was just purely to sort of see whether you're a spender or a saver. But it's also so that you can communicate that with each other if you're a family unit, just so that you make sure that you understand where each other's coming from. If you are if you are one of those people who spontaneously spends, and your partner is someone who actually saves, then you've got to get a balance because one will actually feel, oh, you'll never, you never do anything. You're not very generous with your outgoings. Whereas the other one will say, oh, you're always wasting the money. And actually, somewhere in between is a better balance for a married relationship. I mean, if you're on your own, then I say focus more on saving than focus on spending. But that's something we're going to look at in the budget. So the next thing we did was I gave you a budget sheet. And it's just a very basic budget sheet. Now, I don't expect you to sort of share that around or discuss that. But the main aim of it was just to get you to think about what you're spending your money on. Have a look at your income and have a look at your expenditure. And it wasn't a full budget sheet. If we were doing it the full cap money course, we'd go into more detail and we'd sit down with you and help you through it. But it's actually about, are you in control of your finances? Um, how often do you think about money? Do you know how much money is in your bank account? Now, I mean, in the past, obviously, bank accounts you only knew once a month when the statement came through the post. These days, we've got instant access to. We've all got apps and things on our phones. We can know what we've got. But actually, you think so anyway. But actually, because we have more complicated money systems these days, we aren't fully aware. We probably all have credit cards, and you can add things to different credit card accounts, and then it may come as a shock to you at the end of the month. Oh, did I really spend all that? So you do need to keep control of your budgeting and be aware. I mean, I'm not personally against using credit cards, but I'm against abusing credit cards. Use credit cards wisely, make them work for you, but make sure you're aware of how much you're spending. And that's where budgeting comes in. Also, do you feel in control of your finances? And only by budgeting can you really do that. So it's worth investing a bit of time on looking at your finances. And on, wet days like today, over the winter months, it's good to really sit down and look at your finances and say, am I in control? Am I doing the best things for me and my family? and for the kingdom. And I think, I don't know where your sort of figures came out, but when you add up your income and then take away all your expenditure, there should be something left over at the end. A simple rule that I was advised on way, way back was actually you should, from your income, you should spend 10% by giving to the tithing. 10% should be saved, and you live on the 80% in the middle. Now, a quick poll of the room would probably suggest you live on the 110% and actually struggle with the 10% of giving, and even more so struggle with the 10% saving. And when I say saving, I mean saving for things like, for future holidays, or for, future extensions to your home, or even just, for your children's future and things like that. So we haven't touched on that. We'll have a look at that a bit later. But let's have a look at what we can do about our budget. Because the first thing is, if your budget doesn't balance, then you can either do one or two things. You can either increase your income, or you can reduce your expenditure. So let's have a look at increasing your income. And there are some ways you can do that. You can work extra hours. You can take on a second job and do a bit of extra work to actually top up your finances. You can get your partner to work extra hours, so you manage him better or her better. You can look at your benefits. I mean, you might be entitled to certain benefits that you're not receiving. If you've got if you're older, or if you have certain illnesses, there might be benefits that you can benefit from. You might benefit from if you have grown-up children living at home. But maybe not. But you could potentially see them, that they could contribute towards the household bills. So you try that one. But some recognize. You could consider taking on a lodger or renting out a room. Or you could consider selling things. Now, most of us have things stored in the garage that we're saving for a rainy day. And actually, just to generate some instant cash into your financial situation, selling things is definitely a way that you could do that. But it's obviously, once you've sold it, it's gone. So it's a one-time thing. And of course, obviously, you'll sell it for a lot less than you bought it for. And that's the reality of most things we buy. The moment you walk out of the store, it's lost its value. Regardless of what branding it has on it, the likelihood is it drops, a lot the moment you walk out the store. And so, yes, you can sell things, but obviously recognize that you're not going to recover what you spent on it. But that might then make you think, well, why did I buy it in the first place? Which actually brings us on to what we do about our expenditure. So we can look at reducing our expenditure. And there's three ways that Cut Money talk about. One is to cut costs, to do it cheaper. The other one is to cut back, which is to do it less. And the other one is to cut out, which is don't do it at all. So let's have a look at some of those. Cutting costs, do it cheaper. One good thing to do on a regular basis is to look at your expenditure on suppliers. I have this sort of process, and often Isabel and I bounce these ideas off each other at the office, where I actually phone my suppliers or check online if I have an online account to see whether or not I can reduce my expenditure. And by doing that, actually, throughout this energy crisis, I've always paid lower rates for my energy than most people. I was fortunate enough to have an idea that something was coming and signed up to a 2-year fixed rate deal when things skyrocketed. So I carried on paying at the same rate for those 2 years when everybody else was way, way higher. Then obviously at the end of that period, I had to renew it. By that stage, fortunately, I was over the curve. And the other week, I could see that energy prices were going to go up again. And I already had a fixed deal in place, but I then extended that deal for 2 years to get over the next little hump that's happening. So energy prices is something that you be aware of, but all of your suppliers, you should look at it, and you might well, very much, I'd say, keep track of your direct debits. If you're paying your water bill so much per month, keep track of the bills that are coming out and make sure you're on top of them. It's much easier now to add a few pounds to your direct debit than it is in a year's time to suddenly find you're £100 in arrears and have to catch that up. So wherever you can, keep an eye on your regular outgoings. Certainly when you're buying things, do comparison sites. So, compare the market type things. I've just renewed my home insurance. I've been with the same home insurer since we moved into our house 7 years ago. And I thought they were quite reasonable. And then this year, for some unknown reason, not having had a claim or anything else, my insurance bill jumped up by £200. They changed some of the rules and things like that. I thought that's crazy. So I then went onto a comparison site and got the same insurance for £200 less than I paid last year. So I've not paid the extra 200 on the old rate. I've actually saved 200 on the old rate. So it's definitely worth doing that. Keep track of it. I mean, basically, money, our finances are somewhat limited. God's finances are unlimited. But our finances, our income stream tends to be a certain way. And so we need to make sure our expenditure is also limited. And if we can reduce our expenditure, then we have more left over. I was talking to someone yesterday, some friends of ours who live in America, and they're very wealthy friends, and they've both had very high paid, sort of high living jobs for a long time. But they're both currently out of work. They don't have any immediate problems because they own 2 homes and they own, all their cars. They don't have any debt, and they've had an inheritance payout, so they're perfectly well at the moment. But their lifestyle was quite high, because they had so much money coming in, and now having to review how they had during this period of time. I'm sure they will get jobs and get back to normal very soon, but they're having to review it. And it's always a good thing to review our finances on a regular basis. If we don't, things just get out of control. Just be in control of your finances is what I'm trying to recommend. And so review these things. There's a term in business which says that turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And that simply means it's all very well having loads of money coming in, but if it's all going out and there's nothing left at the end of the term or the end of the month or whatever, then you're not making much profit. So you've got to change it. And we've done that through our business life. We've been in business since 1994, I think. No, 2000. Yeah, 94. So 30 years. And we've had times when we've had so much money coming in, but we've had also times when we've had so many staff, we've had so much money going out as well. And there are times when you'd think, well, we were doing so well, millions of pounds coming in, well, nearly. But if it all went out, there was no profit left. And in fact, during some of our most income generating years, we made less profit than when we had really low income and had more of a surplus. So it's actually about getting the balance right in your life. And you must live within your own means. And so constantly reviewing it helps you to do that. Keeps an eye on your finances, your income, keep an eye on your outgoings. In the supermarket, check what is the best value. Often you will get tempted by offers. When you look at them in detail, actually, maybe it's not quite as good as you thought. So don't be tempted. I mean, again, another classic about the difference in characters. Roman and I used to live in South Marsden. We would shop at Sainsbury's, and Sainsbury's is too big for us. And so we would start at both ends of the store. I would go one end, and Remini would go the other. Remini would have a list. And when we met in the middle, she would have completed most of the things on her list. I, on the other hand, would have a trolley load of stuff that wasn't on any list. I'd picked up all the bargains, but they're bargains, but we don't need them. And that's something that's, ask yourself, do I really need it? So when you're looking in the store, yes, it might be a bargain, but if you don't need it, it's not. It's a waste of money. And trying to get cheaper versions of things. We now shop in Aldi. Aldi is our walk-in larder, isn't it, Isabel? Because our business premises are almost right next door. And there are certain things in Aldi that are so much cheaper than most of the other supermarkets. But there are certain things in Aldi which are not as good as some of the other supermarkets. So weigh that up. Go and buy all the really economical things that Aldi supply, and then buy yourself a few treats from some of the other supermarkets, because actually you might save yourself 10 pence, but the quality isn't so good on certain things. So just be aware. But I definitely recommend Aldi for reducing some of your bills.
Good ice creams.
And also, the other thing is, don't be snobbish about it. I mean, some people will only shop Waitrose. So, because it's, that's the store, And actually, it's not embarrassing to walk into Aldi. Really, let's get over our pride in some of these areas and be sensible. So, reduce expenditure. You can cut costs, which we've just talked about. You can cut back. For example, if you have a takeaway every week, you're likely to be spending about 18 to 20 pounds for a couple of which means over a year you'll be spending 936 pounds if you spend 18 pounds a week. If you only did it every other week, then it will be cheaper. If you chose slightly less expensive, we could go to KFC on a Friday night, couldn't we? That's generally KFC sort of a cheaper option, get more for your money. I'm not making an advertising here. I'm just commenting. It's tasty, that's right. But no, just look at those type of things. By reducing the frequency of it, rather than having it every week. And actually, when you look at things, if you have the same thing all the time, it actually does become quite boring, even if it's really, really nice. Mix it up a bit, and you'll sometimes find that actually it's nice. I mean, we love to go away on holiday together as a family. And when we do, we often have these lavish meals together. Because when you suddenly get 11 people gathered around a meal table, you first of all have to supply a lot of food. But actually, it seems so radically beneficial to do it because you're sort of buying in volume, and it makes a real difference. Compared to going to a restaurant for 11 people, which is incredibly expensive. So, look at those things. Sometimes a meal around the table at home as a big family, okay, there's a bit more work involved. I don't deny that. There's certainly more washing up involved, but it's actually a lot of fun to do it. And it's a lot cheaper than going out and having a lavish meal. So consider reducing the frequency of things. If you buy lunch every day, it can, say, £3.50, a meal deal type thing. £910 a year if you did that every day, every working day. And I mean, to be honest, a coffee every day would almost be that too. If you had a cost of coffee. So look at that. If you only did it once a week, you could save £700. So there are ways of making some savings just by cutting back on the things you do. And then, of course, there's that hard one, which is to cut out. Don't do it at all. And again, I think if you look through and keep track of your budget, you may well find that there are things you're using and spending money on that you don't. Sorry, there are things that you're spending money on, but you're not using. So, I mean, I recently looked at I was paying out for Spotify to have a, ad-free service, $9.99 a month. I think it was $8.99, something like that, every month. And I thought, well, when did I last use that? And it was like a couple of months before that I had, because there's other streaming services that you can use to get that. And so I thought, well, actually, it's not worth paying it, so stop it. And so wherever you've got those type of things, I remember, can I share this, Alex? I remember when Alex was first sort of starting to work, and I sat down with Alex to look at his budget or non-budget. He was earning money, he was living at home, no real expenses, but he somehow was going overdrawn. And I said, this cannot work. So we sat down and looked through his bank account. And I said, what's this? What's this? And there were things that he wasn't using, but he was paying for, that we were able to cut out and turn it around. And so actually he had, again, more money than before. So it's things like that where we all do it. We all don't really pay too much attention to the odd £10 here or the odd £10 there. But you should review them. And if you go through your budget, you can do that. So have a look at those areas where you can cut things out. And I say, if we did the Cap Money course, we would actually look at those things in detail with you to help you out. But if after doing those things, it still doesn't balance, then sadly you have to repeat the process, because you've got to get your budget in balance. You can't continue ad infinitum where your income is less than your expenditure. You'll get yourself further and further into debt, and that doesn't help anyone. And you can stave it off for a while by using credit cards and maybe take out a loan and things like that. But actually, it's not getting to the root of the issue. You need to live within your means. And I say living within your means in my calendar, my book, is actually 80% of your income, and having 10% to give and 10% to save for those things. Because when I say save, you need money for things like when the car does break down that you haven't budgeted for, or you things happen. Life happens, and so you need to be prepared for that. And if you're living right up to the maximum of your income, then you haven't got anything in store for when the situations happen. So try and reduce down your expenditure, and if necessary, try and increase your income. And go and talk to your employer. I'm not talking to you, Alex. So yes, who knows? You may have a generous employer. Dear. But anyway, if it really doesn't balance, firstly, I'd say don't panic, because if you do that spreadsheet and there's a massive negative, all it's done is just reveal the problem you already have. The problem is there if that is the situation. So there's no point panicking now. You haven't panicked up until this point. Just doing the spreadsheet shouldn't change that dynamic. But bear in mind that we're here to help. And talk to Donovan, Greg, myself, we are more than happy to help and try and see how we can address certain things. Often, just looking at things in a different light or from a different perspective can change the way you see it. But finances can be very daunting, and it's not everybody's cup of tea to do spreadsheets. Isabella and I love spreadsheets. It's just our nature, but other people don't necessarily like spreadsheets. But actually, it's worth doing it just to make sure where you're at, seeing where you are, and making sure you're in control of your finances. And that changes the dynamic. And I say, if we need to sit down further and go through it, I mean, I can do a full Cap Money course for some individuals who need it, but that's possibly not necessary here. But I wanted to share a scripture from 1 Kings, and to sort of see the problem in a slightly different light, recognizing that sometimes when we have a problem, that God is a miracle working God and can change that situation. And there's a story of Elijah and the widow at Zarephath in 1 Kings 17 and verses 7 to 24. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. And then the Lord came to Elijah and said to him, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath, where he came to the town gate. A widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." So obviously her financial situation is fairly dire. She's on her last bit of flour, she's on her last bit of oil, she's gathering sticks from outside, and then she's going to go home, eat her last meal and die. So she obviously doesn't have a lot of hope for her situation. And hopefully that isn't the case with any of you in your financial situation. But if it were, let's look at what happened. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." So she went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. So sometimes we need to go to step in and do a miracle in our lives. Sometimes we just need to adjust a few things and be a bit sensible about the way we do it. But God is a miracle working God. And if we come to him in desperation, he will move on our behalf. But do everything you can within your own power first, but seek counsel. Don't be embarrassed about your financial situation. Get someone else to pray with you. You know, be in unity over it. I mean, sometimes just being willing to admit that you need a bit of help can open up a door to a miracle. And believe that, each one of us has the ability to pray to our God and see God come through on our behalf. But praying for others also is a blessing. Now, I need to say, for those whose budget does balance, well done. Now, if you did your calculations on your spreadsheet, and I still have some spreadsheets if no one's, if you need to, have a look at then if how much is left over. Because the spreadsheet I gave you was literally to cover basic needs. There's also, beyond that, there will be other things that you need to set funds aside for. So the principles that I've laid out today about cutting costs and so on can still apply to you, even if you have lots left over. Because actually, by applying some of these principles, you would have more left over. And so don't say, "Oh, well, I don't need to do this because I'm okay." As I mentioned at the beginning, the devil comes to rob, kill, and destroy. And if you think you're okay, you can, I won't say guarantee, but you can almost guarantee the devil will take the opportunity to have a stab. Something could go wrong, if you're that arrogant and believe that everything's fine. So it's great to be in a good position, but don't take it lightly. Remember the Lord your God in all these situations. We're encouraged to be good stewards and continue to work on a sensible budget. And you'll still need savings for holidays and birthdays, and Christmas is coming. and emergencies that will crop up. So always be in control of your finances. Think about that simple principle: 10% giving, 10% saving, 80% to live on. And if you can achieve that, then you will have a happy life and continue with it. So use some principles, use the same principles to improve what remains and be more secure as you are able then to give more freely. If you're in control of your finances and if you have money to spare, then you are able to give. If you're restricted, then your giving is low down on your priority list because you've got to survive. You've got to pay your mortgage. You've got to pay for the food on the table. And there's not much left over sometimes. But actually, if you manage it well, you will find a way of being able to give in due season when the needs are there. And I just want to finish with Psalm 112, which I was given this week, and I thought this really is appropriate for how we as Christians should live. Blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in his commandments. Their children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in their houses, and their righteousness endures forever. Even in darkness, light dawns for the upright, for those who are gracious and compassionate and righteous. Good will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice. Surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Their hearts are secure. They will have no fear in the end. They will look in triumph on their foes. They have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Their horn will be lifted high in honor. That's, how we would all love to live our lives. To be viewed as a righteous person who can give to the poor and be generous in good times and bad. And we aren't fearful of what may come because we trust in the Lord. And that's how we should be with our finances. It requires trust. We need to recognize, and I tried to lay that out last week, that God wants to prosper us. He is there for us. He wants us to be blessed so that we can be a blessing to others. And if you get that mindset, then you can recognize that with God's help, we can do all things. And finances is something we need to bring under our control, because if it's not under our control, the enemy will step in and take control. So be encouraged. Whatever your situation, God is still in control. And next week, we're going to have a look at debt-free living and have a look at how to manage debts a bit differently. So, how are we doing time-wise? I was going to say, were there any questions on the budgeting process that people had any queries with? Apart from, oh gosh, it doesn't balance.